It's the summer of 1942. The U.S. has just scored a huge victory at Midway, but the war in the Pacific is nowhere near over. Japan's empire is a sprawling fortress of islands, and the Allies are staring down a truly monumental challenge. Their solution would have to be a strategy just as vast and just as unforgiving as the Pacific Ocean itself.
You know, this was the terrifying question at the heart of the entire Pacific War. American forces were facing an enemy that was driven by a code of honor where surrender just wasn't an option. So defeating them, that was going to take more than just military might. It would require a completely new way of fighting a war. To really get the American strategy, we first have to look at the chessboard from Japan's point of view. See, they had built this massive empire, but it was all sitting on a foundation that had one critical, fatal weakness. Right, so here's the thing you have to understand about Japan. Their entire war machine, all their planes, all their ships, it all ran on resources like oil and rubber that they had seized from other places. Their home islands had almost nothing. So to protect these absolutely vital supply lines, they created what they called a ring of steel, a whole chain of heavily armed island bases designed to stop any Allied advance cold. So how do you break a ring of steel? Well, you don't do it by smashing your head against every single link in the chain. The American solution was, honestly, pretty brilliant. It was audacious, and it was going to be executed as this massive, two-pronged assault across the enormous Pacific. And this is the core idea right here. Island hopping wasn't about conquering every single Japanese island. I mean, that would have taken decades and cost millions of lives. The idea was to literally leapfrog over the strongest fortresses. You'd seize weaker but strategically vital islands, build airfields on them, and then use those new bases to hop to the next target. All the while, you'd be cutting off and starving the strongholds you left behind. And this whole plan unfolded along two main paths. Down in the Southwest Pacific, you had the very charismatic Army General Douglas MacArthur, and he was going to push through the dense jungles of New Guinea. At the exact same time, way out in the Central Pacific, Admiral Chester Nimitz would lead the Navy and Marines on a more direct path straight across the ocean. Okay, so let's follow MacArthur's path first. It was this brutal, miserable slog through the jungle that all started on a little-known island that would very soon become infamous, Guadalcanal. The initial landing at Guadalcanal, it went like clockwork. The Marines actually secured the all-important airfield within a day. But just 12 days later, Japan counterattacked with a ferocity that was just shocking. What was supposed to be a quick fight turned into a 6-month-long meat grinder of naval battles, jungle skirmishes, and just relentless, brutal attrition. And these numbers, they really show you the cost. For this one tiny island, America lost 7,100 men. But look at Japan's losses. Staggering. Over 3 times that many. This battle was a horrific taste of what was coming, and it proved that every single inch of ground was going to be paid for in blood. Next up was the massive Japanese fortress of Rabaul. This was a huge air and naval base, but here we see the island-hopping strategy in perfect action. The plan, which was called Operation Cartwheel, wasn't to attack Rabaul directly at all. No. Instead, MacArthur's forces captured all the islands around it, effectively turning a fortress into a prison for 100,000 Japanese soldiers who just sit there, useless for the rest of the war. And you have to understand, the conditions were a living hell. It wasn't just the fanatical bonsai charges or the hidden bunkers. The jungle itself was a relentless enemy. Unseen killers like malaria and dysentery, they were often way more deadly than any Japanese soldier. Okay, so meanwhile, halfway across the world's largest ocean, that second prong of the attack was unfolding. Admiral Nimitz was leading a massive naval force straight through the Central Pacific, and it was a path that was going to teach its own set of hard, bloody lessons. The first real test for Nimitz's forces was this tiny little atoll called Tarawa. The plan seemed pretty standard: pound the island with naval guns, then send in the Marines. But a single, critical miscalculation turned what should have been a straightforward landing into an absolute catastrophe.
So here's what happened. The landing craft got stuck on these coral reefs because of an unexpected low tide. Marines were forced to wade hundreds of yards to get to the shore in chest-deep water, completely exposed to Japanese machine guns the entire way. It was a massacre. And just look at those numbers for the Japanese garrison. Out of 4,700 defenders, only 17 were captured alive. Tarawa was a brutal lesson, but one that led to some crucial changes in how they did these landings.
As the U.S. pushed closer onto the Mariana Islands, Japan decided to risk it all. They mobilized a gigantic carrier fleet to try and ambush the American Navy, and this kicked off the largest carrier-to-carrier battle in all of history. But there was a fatal flaw in their plan. Their pilots were rookies, while America's were seasoned veterans flying far superior aircraft.
The result was so incredibly one-sided, it became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The U.S. lost just 29 planes. Japan? They lost nearly 400, plus 3 aircraft carriers. In a single day, Japanese naval aviation was, for all intents and purposes, wiped out as a fighting force. It was over.
So, with its navy shattered and its island defenses crumbling, Japan got more and more desperate. The war entered its final, most brutal phase, where the fanaticism reached a terrifying new level. Unable to fight a conventional war anymore, Japan unleashed the kamikaze. These were pilots whose one and only mission was to fly their planes, which were packed with explosives, directly into American warships. It was a horrifying tactic that really took the war's fanaticism to its absolute extreme. And through all of this, General MacArthur had one single, overriding goal: to fulfill the promise he made when he was forced to flee the Philippines back in 1941. He was absolutely determined to return, and now the stage was finally set for the largest land campaign of the Pacific War.
But the liberation of the Philippine capital, Manila, was not going to be swift. Defying his own direct orders to retreat, the Japanese commander turned the beautiful, historic city into a fortress. What followed was a month-long, street-by-street bloodbath, the first brutal taste of urban warfare in the Pacific. MacArthur kept his promise, but the price was devastating. While military casualties were high on both sides, they were dwarfed by this number: 100,000. Let that sink in. That's the estimated number of Filipino civilians killed in the fighting, many in just brutal massacres by the cornered Japanese forces.
So by early 1945, there was just no question: island hopping had worked. As a strategy, it was a massive success. Japan was isolated, its navy was at the bottom of the ocean, and its resources were completely cut off. But here was the terrifying paradox: the closer the Allies got to Japan, the more ferocious and the more suicidal the resistance became.
And this left American leaders with an impossible question. Their strategy had brought them right to Japan's doorstep, but it had also revealed the terrifying truth of their enemy's mindset. Sure, they could win every single battle, but how could they possibly win the war and force a surrender from a nation that seemed determined to fight to the very last man, woman, and child?